17, 2020. Welcome to the show. I have my co-host today, Carlos Ponce, who's just outside of Mexico City, joining us. And we also have our guest, Ben Kearns with DataStax. Looking forward to speaking with him. Hi, Ben. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Ben, please introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Ben Kearns. I'm the current VP of Engineering at DataStax. And I've been here about 2.5 months. Prior to DataStax, I was actually with a company that was a customer of Nearsoft, Figure 8, previously called Crowdflower. I have about 20 plus years of software development experience. These are all software development books behind me, as you can see. And I've spent years building both remote teams and distributed teams, and built some of the largest sites connected to the internet.
Well, welcome to the show, Ben. Tell us a little bit about DataStax, your current company.
Yeah, so DataStax is the parent company behind the open source distributed database Cassandra. So Cassandra is the database that is behind many of the always-on properties that are connected to the internet. We have been around for 10 plus years. We have a commercial product called DataStax Enterprise, and DataStax Enterprise is used by a ton of customers as well, from logistics to financial services through everything else. So it's all about distributed. The interesting thing about DataStax is a completely distributed remote culture. So most of my engineers do not come to an office when we can go to an office. They work for me everywhere from Poland all the way through to Singapore. We have follow the sun support for Cassandra and for DSE. And it's a very highly talented, very technical team, and we focus on hiring people wherever they live in the world.
Well, this should be an interesting conversation, considering that remote work has sort of been forced on everyone in the past few months, and here you are, a company that's actually doing it as part of your business practice. Carlos, let's go right into the conversation today. What is the topic today? Let's dig right in.
Absolutely, Tulio. Thank you so much. Today, Tulio, we're going to be speaking with our guest about managing sophisticated technology and teams remotely. So it doesn't get any more relevant than that nowadays, right? So he's going to talk to us about how to set up remote work so that you and your team and everybody, can be successful in a nutshell. Ben, I'd like to ask you first thing, tell us why you chose this particular topic. Why did you think it was relevant? So let's elaborate on that, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so this topic right now is very timely because many people are being forced to work from their houses, from other places. They can't go into the office because of COVID-19. And I've actually been doing this for almost 2 decades. And I thought some of the tools and techniques that I've learned over the years might be relevant for people who are just doing this for the first time, or are doing this and are finding potentially that they're having issues with it because it's very different. It can be very disorienting not having a lot of interpersonal contact. It can be disorienting because some of the tools that you use as a manager when you're working with people in an office, it's hard to find analogs for those, and how do you do that? And then most of the books that you read about managing software presume that you can just have a daily stand-up and you pull everybody into the same room and it just works. And that doesn't actually work when you have multiple time zones and you have some complexity there. So I thought that I could share some tools, techniques, some things that I've done poorly and some things that I've done well.
Thank you so much. Definitely very timely. I know that some companies are struggling, and so let's go right into it. If you had to break it down into some simple steps or simple methodology or practices that are must-haves in order to be effective to working remotely, what are some of those things that over the past 2 decades you would want to share with someone like, I'm still trying to figure this out, I'm struggling through it. Ben, tell me what's worked for you in the past 20 years, in like 10 minutes. So what would be some of the things you would recommend right out of the gate to focus on to start?
Yeah, right out of the gate. So in the modern era where, video conferencing is very easy to have, we actually started 20 years ago with, so I opened an office in New York and I opened an office in Germany for an early consulting company. And we leveraged video even back then, 20 plus years ago. And we created this thing that we called the long hallway. Because there is something to be said about the face-to-face communication that's there. And it tends to be all about communication. You want to be able to read people's facial expressions. One of the challenges with modern video conferencing is, and I'm watching this as my 8-year-old is practicing or is going to school on Zoom, is this Zoom fatigue. And so I think there has to be a balance between like phone calls where you have real-time interaction with people with low latency. I think Zoom adds a couple of milliseconds of latency that makes the conversations feel more complicated than they need to be. But I've also leveraged, so video is important, but text medium for me has been one of the most important things. So back in the olden days, we used to use either IRC or Yahoo Instant Messenger or a variety of others. And I created a practice where what I would do for my direct reports and for a lot of my organization is a little bit of what I kind of took from my in-person management techniques, which I like to do management by walking around. And management by walking around in a virtual environment is really hard because you don't want to just call somebody on the phone. That's very disruptive. You don't want to video conference them. That's even more disruptive. So text messaging is a way to kind of shoulder tap someone in an asynchronous way. And when I text people, oftentimes I'll text them not just to talk about work. It's just to be like, hey, how's it going? Because for me, what I found that is one of the things that's the hardest about working remote is knowing that your boss cares about you, that your coworkers care about you, and that you're attached to the organization. And we tend to depersonalize a lot of our communication when it's on a work system. So it tends to be very antiseptic, and that context of where you're coming from, and the fact that I have an 8-year-old that's home that's running around in the background and is potentially screaming is important to know for my coworkers when I'm reacting certain ways. And for other people, getting to know them better about what their personal situation is one of the keys that is hard to do unless you do it on purpose and force yourself to do it.
All right. So what I'm hearing, Ben, is you've got to have some variety on how you communicate with each other. It can't just all be video calls. It can't just be all text. It can't just be a phone call, but a combination of those things. And don't just connect with someone when it's just business, you need an update or something, but actually do the water cooler check-in sort of a thing remotely, I suppose. Okay, yeah. So that's great advice. Mixing up the technology, the use of technology, the time on when you're checking in and for what you're checking in for with each other. What else? What else has come up in terms of how do you deal with conflict? Like, is there less conflict sometimes when people are working remotely than they would be in the office? Sometimes, people face to face, they're rubbish. Some people don't get along. Does that come up? How do you handle that with remote teams?
I think the conflict is different. The conflict that often comes up because people, especially if you haven't built this layer of trust with the water cooler conversations. So a completely remote organization, you lack a lot of contextual cues in text. So I've actually probably seen more kind of conflict created by people reading into emails in a way that wasn't meant than I have with people having face-to-face conversations. And this is one of the reasons why I say you have to have variety in your communications, and you have to actually build this base of trust, and you have to make sure that everyone understands to presume the benevolent assumption, and make sure that they understand that other people are bringing additional baggage, and don't immediately go to the negative way of reading that email that came across. And if you feel like your somatic response, like if you feel like the hair going up back on your neck and you feel like there's conflict coming, just get on the phone, or in this day and age, get on Zoom and get on a video conference and talk it out. Because generally, when you're in an organization, whether you're a service provider or others, you're trying to do the right thing. And everyone's trying to actually make the organization move forward and be the best that it can be. But those miscommunications come in email, they come in Slack, they come in face-to-face conversations, and they come in Zoom. And it's all about communication and making sure that you can build that trust. And that trust is hard to build remote because you can't actually read people's body language as well.
Yeah, that's so important. You can't convey context or body language or facial expressions on text, and often people can interpret what they're reading based on their own state of being, right? So are you suggesting that for remote teams, some effort is put into helping individuals who might have the tendency to translate a message as, why were they so short with me? I mean, maybe they didn't know the 8-year-old's running around and they had to quickly respond to something. It had nothing to do with them, but someone could interpret it as, why were they so short with me, and so on. Is there a need for some additional training, like emotional intelligence development training for remote workers? Is that what has worked for you historically in terms of limiting that kind of impact, that conflict that could exist from just misunderstanding? Besides the, hey, make a phone call and check in with them, how do you get people to recognize that in themselves, stop instead of festering with it for days, and actually making that call? What's worked for you guys? What's worked for you?
So what's worked for me is like starting to build the trust throughout the organization, not just with my direct reports. So like I'll reach out to individual contributors throughout the organization and schedule lots of one-on-one time where it's less about what they're working on and who it's there. What I also have tried to focus on is like when I start one-on-ones or when I start individual meetings, I just frame it with, how's it going? And open it up with a very open-ended question that allows us to start in an area of what they're thinking about. Because it generally, when you ask someone, how's it going? And you're just like saying more than just fine, like they'll give you a little bit more information often about what is going on personally. Especially if you start to open up to them about what is going on with you personally as well. So it's some of this is about bringing your genuine self to work and being okay with that. But the other part is focusing on how, like, letting other people bring their genuine self as well. And then once you do that, you'll find that the conflicts, and I will actually sometimes bring two people together and act as sort of a facilitator of this conversation, and kind of, you can't let issues fester. You have to really get in front of them and work towards making this a successful relationship. And building relationships is effort, and you have to do a lot of work to make it work.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I'm curious about how that impacts in multicultural environments, right? You mentioned you work with various countries, and so different cultures respond differently to things like opening up and being vulnerable and saying, like, I'm having a bad day today, please be kind to me. Some cultures don't encourage that yet, right? It's hard to believe that is unfortunately the reality. So how do you make that work in multicultural environments? Have you had to adopt different styles? How do you do that?
So what I found, because people can't read body language, is I found that I have to be much more explicit and much more self-aware about myself, because I try to use the way that I act as a model for others. So for example, one of the things I know about myself is I like to think about things out loud. So I like to talk it through, so I'll just tell people, like, hey, I haven't really thought this through all the way yet. Let's work this out together. I like to think about out loud. And by framing it very explicitly, they don't think that I'm telling them what to do, because in lots of contexts, if you're not aware of why you're doing something, other people can pick it up by your nonverbal cues. If you're in a physical setting, but you have to be way more explicit and way more self-aware when you're working remotely, because like you guys can't see my arms really well. And you can't see that I'm super excited because I'm like mulling an idea over if we're talking about it on the phone or through text. So being more explicit is very key. And then just telling people like, hey, I'm an American. I live in California. I spent a lot of time in New York. So I have like the little bit of a hard New York exterior. I'm going to be very direct with you. But I also have this little bit of California, like, hey, I'm going to, like, everything's going to be okay. And
I totally get that.
You know, helping kind of
same here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. I know you got some questions, Carlos.
Yeah,
I'll hold mine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm curious about the one aspect in particular about dealing with remote teams that are kind of scattered all over the place, all over the globe, so, literally. So my question is more along the lines of communication styles and how to deal with them. From what I've seen in the engineering world, a lot of engineers even label themselves or refer to themselves as introverts. So a lot of these great engineers are more introverts than anything else. So it's kind of, for a lot of them, it's just kind of hard to even, communicate or send out signals or, however you want to call it. So, and that gets even more complicated when you're dealing with international teams. So how do you deal with homogenizing a communication style in a way that it's understandable for all parties involved? I think for me, I see it as a challenge, especially with international teams. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that, or what sort of best practices would you recommend for international teams with different cultures, different languages, different time zones, so that they're all work seamlessly?
One of the things that I found as being successful is introverts tend to be introvert in groups. And so having one-on-one conversations with people, and one of the things that I actually think that in the era where everybody's on Zoom, some of the techniques that I use to facilitate meetings in person are very useful, which is you look to make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak in a conversation. And if somebody's dialed into a conversation, it's often because they have something important to say, but the introverts won't necessarily barge in. So it's your job as a leader to go through and be like, all right, I'm going to pick out this person that's in the bottom left-hand corner, and I'm going to carve out time and carve out space for them to have the floor. And also working towards kind of communicating with people that we're very respectful and we don't try to interrupt people. And sort of, it's about creating space, because introverts almost always have great ideas, or introverts have as many great ideas as everybody else. But the louder voices tend to dominate, unless you're very, also getting back to the explicitness of the relationship, unless you're very explicit. But this happens whether you're in person or not. And the techniques for facilitation are the same, is making sure that you're going around the room and everybody has a chance to speak. One of the reasons that I like daily stand-ups when I'm in person is it forces everyone to have their own space in the day to talk amongst other people. And even if they just say, hey, I got stuck yesterday, hey, I'm blocked, it allows somebody to say, hey, why don't I come over there and you can tell me how you're blocked and we can work together on this. You can do a lot of that in Slack as well, or in phone calls or in Zoom. It just takes a little bit more effort, and you have to be more aware that you need to do it, because it's easy to do when you're in an office and you're walking around and you're seeing somebody with their head in their hands. You can see their body language. In the remote area, you have to be more explicit and just check on people.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you?
No, go ahead, Carlos.
Sorry, Julio. No, I was just going to add that, specifically in this day and age, in the COVID age, and everything that we're going through, even those teams that we're very accustomed, very used to working together, the bonding together at an office. They're all spread out, right? So it's like that that just alone, and that by itself poses a great challenge to overcome. So how would you say that, or would you say that this change in the recent months has had an impact on the quality of the code being put out by teams of engineers, and how can they be overcome that part? Because a lot of engineers think of coding as something creative process. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I've heard. I'm not an engineer, so there's sort of this creative approach to coming up with beautiful code. And I assume that a lot of the circumstances that are affecting all of us can have an effect on that. How can they lessen the impact of being locked down for days, for months, for weeks on end, into the quality of the work that they're being put out? How can it be overcome?
Yeah, I've actually found, so DataStax was virtual before COVID. My team at Verizon was virtual. We had some offices, but it was very virtual. I found that in-person communication can lead to even sloppier work than remote. Because of the explicitness required for remote communication, like walking into DataStax, we have tons and tons of very deep technical conversations by people that are introverts. Like database engineers are some of the most introvert people on the planet. Like they think in indexes and they think in milliseconds and microseconds of latency, and figuring out how to get rid of it. And for them, sitting down and getting into the zone and getting into focus and writing down like, hey, I think this can actually shave off 250 milliseconds. And like I've seen bigger documents created here that you can actually work through and talk through and reason about than I have at many other companies that are doing work. But it requires you to rechannel your effort. Like the effort that you used to do when you'd walk over to the water cooler and just chat, now you're gonna plow into either like pinging people on Slack or hey, let's just get into a room and whiteboard this. Maybe it's like you get two people collaborating on a Google Doc, and you just kind of go back and forth directly while you have multiple communication mechanisms. You might have a Google Doc open here, video chat, and some Slack where you're sharing things. And the more communication channels you open, the faster that mind meld can happen. And you can do it with 2 or 3 or 4 people. But it often requires using all the tools that are there. I find that Google Docs for me is a much better collaboration tool than Microsoft Word documents where we had to email them back and forth. Seeing that real-time collaboration on a document and talking through the design it can lead to better outcomes actually than somebody going off into a room with 2 people and then starting to bang out some code without really thinking it through and socializing.
Okay, thank you so much, Ben. Okay.
Yeah,
back to you, Tulio.
Let's see if I can recap what I've learned so far. Okay, so to be effective in working remote, managing remote teams, number 1, have a variety of different communication tools at your disposal. Use video, use text, use a traditional phone call. Keep it interesting and don't always check in about business. Do a quick check-in, social call, if you will. So mix it up so it doesn't get boring and monotonous. The other thing I've heard is, and I thought this was brilliant, this idea of perhaps even announcing your mood, right? So that if you're communicating via text, you could say, I'm excited right now, and then that creates context for what you're going to say, or I'm a little concerned, or whatever the context is, so that you kind of almost feed the other individual how they should read that text, right? So that they don't interpret it their own way, or perhaps we might be like, I'm in the middle of something with my kid right now, and I'm just going to do a quick response, and someone doesn't take that personal as like being cold or short or snippy. So that could be a great way to communicate in a remote environment. Just kind of let people know where your state of mind is in that moment. And the other thing is, as a leader, your job isn't just to get access and disseminate the work and get that going, but facilitate, if I dare say, some intimacy between the folks. Facilitate conversation, facilitate understanding each other, facilitate the process of knowing how to resolve conflicts when they come up. because inevitably when you're not in front of someone, you can't always share your context, your image, your face, your expressions. So conflict can happen because of misinterpretation. Did I miss anything? Anything else that's critically important that you've learned over the past 20 years that you want to share with the guests, with the audience today?
That was a very good recap. To add a little more context and color at the end. So I worked for a company inside of Bosch that was building robots. And one of the things that it was a consumer robot, so it had to be cute and adorable. And one of the things that I learned from one of the Pixar animators, and this is the reason that I started to become way more explicit about my mannerisms, is robots look robotic when they don't telegraph what they're about to do. So for our robot, we used to, before it would turn, she would turn her head and then move her body. Because as a human, when you're in the outside world, that's what you do. You telegraph what you're going to do, and we as humans ascribe those things even to inanimate objects. So understanding the contextual element of why you think or why you feel like you can read somebody's head when they're in person versus when you're remote is mostly about reading these very subtle body language cues that you can't get. So you have to replace those with something else. And so remembering to like move your head before you move your body. Like it doesn't make sense for a robot to have to do that, but it actually personalizes it. And we, at the core, we are social beings. And as social beings, we want to be treated well. We want to know that we're not just the code that I write, we're not just the emails that I write, and we're not just the work that I do.
So Ben, we're coming up on time. I have one final question, unless Carlos has another one. But one thing that comes up over and over is this idea of socializing, right? You mentioned socializing. We're social creatures. How do you create an environment where you're not in the office like you would be in a traditional environment, where at the end of the workday you say, hey, let's go hang out and grab a beer, or just let's play some foosball, something that creates that socialization between people. How do you foster that in a remote environment? What works, and what kind of activities do people do in order to socialize? Because it's obviously you're not playing foosball. So what works?
Yeah, so we've actually been having in our office virtual happy hours where everyone shows up for drinks, and we'll do it at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And one of the exercises that was here inside of DataStax before I got here was kind of a 15 minutes of gratitude. So you go around the room and say, why are you happy that you're working with this person? Or why are you happy that this person is in your life? And that helps foster a team. So I started at DataStax after COVID got locked down, and I feel probably closer to the DataStax executive team that's relatively new in the organization, kind of closer to them than I have with a lot of other executive teams where I've spent time personally, because we have focused on how do you make yourself open and vulnerable, and how do you actually come together as a high performance team, and how do you let people know that you're both human. And so for me, like I make a lot of self-deprecating jokes so that people know that they can make fun of me as well. But it's letting people know that yes, you have a sense of humor. Yes, you have children. Yes, you have life outside of work. And yes, COVID is like is making your life super stressful. Those are all okay. And being as a leader, being open and vulnerable about those, and expressing gratitude explicitly tends to be one of the really key things to help create a really high performance organization.
Ben, it's been a pleasure to have you. Those are great tips. I mean, I have to tell you, I was thinking to myself, man, I'm going to set that up. We should just totally have virtual happy hour at the team and just set it up on a regular basis, even if it's just a cup of coffee, whatever it is. I stop to take a break when I do it with the team, in a very social setting, even though we're remote. So I'm guessing that a lot of listeners will probably implement that. That's such a simple thing to implement and so powerful. And I love the idea of 15 minutes of gratitude. I think that's an amazing thing that you've shared with all of us. Thank you for being our guest. And Carlos, do you have any other questions? Otherwise, we look forward to seeing everyone back on Monday. We're going to have the recap show. We're going to recap the show, talk about the key points we've learned. So if you can, please join us Monday at 1 p.m. Pacific. And I also wanted to say, you have a lot of great advice and tips that would be extraordinarily useful for members of our new mastermind program that we've created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link below each one of these broadcasts for CTOs and VPs of engineering who want to participate and join our mastermind program that we've created. It doesn't cost anything, by the way. It's something that we're offering. You just need to qualify and join our mastermind program. I would love to have someone like yourself be part of it and provide that kind of advice and tips to a lot of folks who might be struggling through the changes that have happened. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, everyone stay safe.
Thank you.
What about next week? There's a lot going on next week, Tulio.
What? We got 2 shows next week or 1?
3 shows. We have 3 shows.
3?
Next week.
All right.
Yeah.
What do we got coming up? I almost forgot.
You're not new, Tulio.
I got so excited talking about the mastermind. I forgot everything else. Go ahead, Carlos. What do we got coming up?
Well, we got Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 1 p.m. right here in Dojo Live. Tuesday, we're going to be speaking with Sumajit Baumik, the CEO of a very interesting concept. The company is called Stitched, and it's a manufacture on demand platform. They manufacture garments, clothes, and all that, but it's all through a platform, and it's on demand. It's similar to print on demand, but it's manufacture on demand. So that's going to be on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, we are going to be speaking with let's see, I got it right here, with Daniel Glickman, CEO of Wave.video. This is also a video animation company that produces a lot of video-related tools and animation tools for companies that want to apply them in marketing and other areas. And we're going to be speaking about the business side and the tech side as well. And also, finally, on Thursday, we're going to be speaking with, let's see who we have here, and we're going to be speaking with Josh Scales, the CEO of Unity Health. That is health tech, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. This doesn't get any more relevant than that either. Health tech on Thursday. Josh Scales, CEO of Unity Health. All of them right here on Dojo Live, 1 p.m. Pacific.
All right, we got a busy week next week. Come and join us again, 1 p.m.
Yep.
Every day but Friday
Yep.
next week. Thanks, guys.
Thank
you.
Hang on, Ben.